You know, I find it quite funny how despite my Sonic fanboy days being pretty much over at this point, I can't help but get really serious when the character is being discussed. Not serious to fanboy levels, but, you know, again, pretty serious. That's probably why I found this video pretty frustrating. Hello everybody, I'm Lunatic the Game, and today I'll be covering a channel known as KnowledgeHub. Back last September, they did a history of retrospective video on the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, his story, and where he's going. I say retrospective because from the way it's set up, I think that's how it's meant to be perceived, but I've got a bone to pick with how it's handled, and I may have an issue or two. Or 70. That being said, before we begin properly though, I want to acknowledge that since me and KnowledgeHub will be discussing sales through the video, I wanted to give a big thank you to a fellow named Melon, who made a document I use for the sales figures. It goes over the sales of each game and how the sales don't necessarily equate to the fan base. It has sources, don't worry. I just wanted to give a big thank you to Melon since his document was an inspiration for the video overall, and was a pretty big help in the making of the video. Anyways, let's begin, shall we?
I am a tiny snowball with huge knockers, and my rage knows no bounds!
Sonic's development teams were fractured and would remain that way, well, forever. Sega itself was just making terrible decisions as there was constant infighting between Sega of Japan and America. That's why there are so many conflicting accessories for the Genesis, one of which had what I consider to be the best 2D Sonic game. Developed for the Sega CD, this game nails down the Sonic platforming better than anything that's come before or after, with maybe one exception. Level design became more streamlined, it became easier to see what's coming ahead, and of course...
So you like Sonic CD, and think it's the best Sonic game aside from say Mania. That's fine. That's an absolutely valid opinion, and I know several who share it, and I see no issue here. But the Senate Sonic CD nails the Sonic formula, streamlines it, and things are easy to see. I have to disagree. In recent years, Sonic CD has been scrutinized for being literally anything but streamlined. A few examples of this include Scott the Wise, Retropolis, and King Kate. The level design, unlike prior games, focuses much more on exploration. While you could rush towards the end goal, you also have the ability to go out and look for goalposts that's in either the past or future, as well as search for robot generators and these holograms of Metal Sonic. Level design is catered around making you look around for these, and generally it's said that this was done in a flawed manner that made the game hard to move around in, especially given how fast Sonic is in general. This wasn't helped by the fact that the level design generally doesn't even allow you to go that fast in the first place, because more often than not, you'll be running into things, or the stage has some sort of gimmick that prevents it, like Wacky Workbench's floor being a giant electric trampoline, or Stardust Speedway having a bunch of varying small pathways, or Tidal Tempest being a fucking water level. I don't think that's really, you know, streamlined at all. This is also kind of important given that this is supposed to be an unbiased retrospective on the subject. You treating this game as a sort of martyr despite the game's love it or hate it reception, I don't really think it works that well.
It seemed like Sonic had finally found a formula that worked, but it didn't last. Again, the fractured development teams meant that Sonic 3 was from Sonic Team proper. To be honest, it feels like a massive step back. More roadblocks, water levels, and iffy level design. All the while, sales were dropping, sequel after sequel.
So apparently the dip in sales between Sonic 1, 2, and 3 is important in what I assume is showing how the sales figure of the series were dropping each game. I mean, first off, the sales were dipping. Kind of a given considering Sonic 1 was, as you said yourself, a pack-in game. It's a guarantee that people seeing a console with a game packed in will grab that one. That being said, I believe Sonic 2 was also a pack-in game though. I believe this wasn't as common as the Sonic 1 pack-in set though. Either way, the game sold 6 million copies. It's known that Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles combined sold about 4 million, which I guess considering that Sonic 2 sold 6 million as a pack-in game, I don't think that's too bad in itself. I know the numbers 4 million and 6 million may sound low, but those are quite high, especially in the context of 90s video games. For example, with the exception of Donkey Kong Country 2, every game on the Super Nintendo that sold 5 million or more copies was at some point packed in with the console. Also, your reasons for Sonic 3 being a massive step back. I already mentioned roadblocks and iffy level design was a mainstay of Sonic CD, so even if it was there, the idea that Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles were taking steps back is kind of laughable in my eyes. And generally, most people dislike Sonic CD because those issues were less present in the game that came before it and after it in the first place. Also, water levels, implying Sonic CD didn't have tidal Tempest. I mean, you're using this as an example of Sonic 3 being a massive step back. How's it a step back if Sonic CD did the exact same fucking thing? That's not a step back, that's called standing still, you baka.
That man said you ain't even seen half of my dick. Bro, you need to go home.
Even the best of these modern Sonic Team games, like Generations, is really just a subpar platformer banking on nostalgia. Yes, there are a few decent levels, but it comes at the cost of hundreds of bad ones. All this stuff is crafted to make the playtime artificially longer, the only thing keeping you around being brief moments of joy while suffering through a slog of this.
You know, am I supposed to be under the impression that you're playing through a terrible level? Because all I see is you being terrible at the level. I mean, it's probably just a random clip of the game, but given how you say this as if you're trying to show how bad it is, I think you get my point. So anyways, let me get this straight. You think Sonic Generations is quite frankly a subpar Sonic game, yada yada. I'm about to interjection why I think this claim is stupid based on what you describe. Again, though, if you think Sonic Generations isn't good, fine, that's an opinion and I won't act like you're wrong. What is wrong is acting like this represents how Sonic has been in a constant decline to the point where even his best games are considered subpar, especially considering Sonic Generations is considered one of the best modern Sonic games, with it generally receiving a median score of an 8 out of 10 from most publications. Not outstanding, but hey, that's still great. On top of that, when has anyone really said that the stages are bad? Like, most people generally agree that what was done with all the stages, both classic and modern-wise, are both great. And in the cases of modern, it's generally seen as the best that the boost gameplay style introduced back in Sonic Unleashed has to offer. I mean, I could figure you're talking about the minigame stages you have to do in order to unlock the bosses. In that case, my issue here is in that area you don't elaborate on this, so most people won't even know what you're talking about if this is the case.
Sales dropped more and more and more.
Not really, actually. Going back to that document I brought up at the start of the video, sales of Sonic games never necessarily got lower in the first place, and if they dipped once, it was for a reason, and later games kind of bounced them back up. Sales did dip a bit starting from Sonic Heroes, but since then they've remained quite consistent. Sonic 06 sold around 900,000 within its first 6 months, but don't forget this is when the 7th generation of consoles like the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were pretty new. Sonic and the Secret Ring sold 1.2 million after its first year on the market. Unleashed sold 2.45 million units. Black Knight sales aren't really known, but are estimated to be around 1.1 million. Sonic Colors sold over 2.2 million. While Generation sales figures are unknown today, we at least know that by March 2012, 4 months after it came out, it had sold 1.6 million. Now, while Sonic Lost World is an outlier at 700,000, the Nintendo Wii U in itself wasn't a system that sold too well to begin with. I mean, in hindsight, a lot of Switch ports of Wii U games sold better than their original versions, such as Mario Kart 8 and Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Can it not be said that being on a not as good selling console hampered their sales too? But even then, in the case of Sonic sales, they were brought back up with Sonic Mania, which hit 1 million digital downloads by April 2018. Basically, what I'm saying is that the series sales never really got lower and lower and lower like you claim. They only dipped a little bit compared to Sonic 3 and the later adventure games, but that's about it.
I am a tiny snowball with huge knockers, and my rage knows no bounds!
Levels were altered to flow better. The game is just a faster experience. It nails down what Sonic should have been 25 years ago, but it didn't sell that well.
Okay, now you're just being completely dishonest. Now, I don't know how well it sold as of April 2020, but we at least know that by April of 2018, the game had sold over 1 million digital downloads. How is that not selling well? Sure, not as good as some of the others, but not only was that within 8 months of the original release, that's still really good in its own right. Not to mention the series got a physical release a few months later that July, which likely continued to push the sales.
And if the games would continue this trajectory, maybe things would be different, but it did not. Soon, we got the worst the Sonic series has to offer. Sonic Forces, the newest game, well, it sold just 100,000 copies.
I'm gonna ignore your comments about Sonic Forces being the worst Sonic game the series has to offer. I understand that this could be how you see it, and I know a lot of people have shared the opinion, Look at the competition. First being the broken mess Sonic 06 that suffered from iffy graphics even for 2006, alongside its terrible story that involves bestiality, alongside its problematic controls that are either extremely precise or incredibly frustrating, such as the snowboarding sections or the Rouge and Knuckles sections, as well as the gameplay glitches that at times takes you out of the fun of the game. There's also Shadow the Hedgehog, known for a story that really isn't that good, not to mention the attempts at being a little more edgy through use of cursing, as well as other aspects such as slippery controls and a horrible system of progression. Sonic Forces is also bad in the story aspect, but the gameplay at least runs well. It's just not really interesting to go through, which, while yes is worth putting as a low tier Sonic game, doesn't make it anywhere objectively the worst one given the competition. But off topic aside, your sources about Sonic Forces' sales, or should I say the lack of therefore, given that in the description of this video, there aren't actually any sources or references for the sales in the description, which honestly is a pretty bad omen. I did eventually learn through Twitter that you did have sources for the sales of the game, that being Video Game Wiki, so I at least know you weren't making things up. But that being said, I ended up looking at the claimed Sonic Forces' sales number of 100,000, and the reference for the source led me absolutely nowhere. So as far as I know, you just looked at the number, which completely derails your claim. I can't really blame you, but I won't excuse such a mistake, because it really just adds to the idea that you're doing this to paint a false picture of Sonic. That aside, as far as we know though, Sonic Forces' sales has not been disclosed by Sega. Sega has commented though that the game performs strongly, and considering Sonic does best on multi-platforms, and Sonic Forces is one given that is on the PS4, PC, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch, it could imply maybe around 700,000 to over 1 million for all we know. TLDR, good job. So with all of that being said and done, that's all I wanted to get out of the way with this video, so I think it's time for me to do my final thoughts. I honestly really don't like this as a retrospective of the series, because while I feel in some areas it does what it needs to decently, on the other hand I feel it absolutely misrepresents the franchise, painting it in a worse light than necessary. I mean, yeah, it's in a bad spot right now, but not as bad as you make it. I get that we all have our opinions on how Sonic is and how we think Sonic should be, but you're letting your bias seep into a video like this. The best advice I could give you from this point forward is to not let it happen again. Also, I didn't bring this up in the video itself, but in the case of sales, there's a large lack of sources in this sales. Wait, what the fuck? I did bring this up in the video. God damn it, lunatic! That's all I got for this video. While I doubt that he would, KnowledgeHub, if you're watching this, just know I didn't make this video out of hate, salt, or spite, or anything like that. I saw this video and got really frustrated at how you presented the Sonic franchise. I say that as a somewhat semi-fan of the series. I think you're overall a pretty good YouTuber. It's just that this one really isn't that good and kind of grinds my gears. So anyways, with that message out of the way, this is Lunatic the Loser, and I'm going to bed.